Greetings all. Welcome to day 4 of AI San Diego's Career Connect program. For those of you with your cameras on, it's good to see some familiar faces. I see some familiar names from previous sessions, but please feel free to turn your cameras on so that we can all take advantage of this time to network and get to know each other. I am Lee Eisen. I'm the Executive Director of AI San Diego. We are a nonprofit professional association here to support architects and designers throughout their careers, and pre-professionals and students as well. So today's panel session is a panel exploring multiple avenues of architecture. It's actually one of my favorites because it's a chance to learn about the different places a career in architecture can take you from actual real professionals in the field. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Dina Gonzalez, an architect at Carrier Johnson & Culture. Dina is also AIA San Diego's Director of Equity, Diversity, Justice, and Inclusion, along with Barbara Leone, who is also here again today, and whom many attendees, if you've gone to previous sessions this week, you would have seen Barbara and gotten to know her as well. So Dina.
Hi, thank you, Lee, for that introduction. I'm Dina Gonzalez. I'm an architect at Carrier Johnson & Culture, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. I'm very excited to be with all of you today, with these great people. And I'm also going to be introducing Jamie Intervallo. She's also an architect at LPA Design Studios. We'll be moderating this panel together.
Thanks, Dina and Lee. I think we're really excited, especially for this panel. We chat with young emerging professionals all year long through our mentorship programs that we have throughout the year. And one of the things that is always a mystery is that there's other parts of architecture that's not just a big, thick pen design. Well, yes, there is. So we're really glad to bring you this panel of experts here today in a diverse set of field and at the leaders in their professions. So thank you all for joining, and we're going to meet all of them right now. So I'd love to introduce each one of these one by one. Isabel is with LPA Design Studios. Isabel, can you share a little bit about yourself and say hello?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. So my name is Isabel. I'm the Director of Laboratory Planning at LPA. And what do lab planners do, you ask? So I'm an architect. I went to architecture school. And then at some point in my career, I decided to dedicate my career exclusively to the design of spaces for science and technology. So we'll talk more about that, but it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. How about you, Rob? Hello, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Rob Foster, a pre-construction project manager with Sunt Construction. So a slightly different path from most architects, but I think I realized early in college that I was more detail oriented and enjoyed problem solving. Had a roommate in a construction management program and did a minor, and kind of that's how I ended up where I'm at today. So, and I think we'll get in more of that later too as well. So thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Matt Winter, architect at LPA Design Studios.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt Winter. I'm the director of mixed use at LPA, and that is mostly that means residential projects, but it sort of anything. It also means anything that's kind of complicated, has lots of different parts and pieces, and has a lot of different kind of programming elements that kind of come together. And I do want to say, Jamie gave me clear instructions not to flip this card, and I messed it up. So, anyways.
It looks good.
You look good, Matt. You're in great shape. You're perfect.
And last but certainly not least, Miss Allison from Carrier Johnson. Hi, Allison. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Keller from Carrier Johnson. I'm a licensed California architect. I'm an ACE mentor for a couple of years. I'm also a California Architect Licensing Commissioner from 2005 to 2010. I've been working at Carrier Johnson for almost 39 years. It's older than you folks with my career, so I'm gonna date myself. I work on quite a few projects, and one great thing is you stay at one place a long time. you get the director, and I work as a senior project architect. It includes the institutional, commercial, mixed use, municipal facilities for clients, for different state university, also for the California State Correctional Facility and the military. So it's been a great ride with this career choice of mine. And I truly enjoy being an architect, and especially enjoying being a mentor to the young people in our office.
Thanks, Allison. I think you might be cutting out a little bit, but we appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, so we have a great program ahead of us. So take it away, Dina.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
No worries. We were able to catch that. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're just going to dive in. I'm so excited to talk to all of you. And one of the, feel free to jump in for anything, obviously, that you want to chime in, but we're going to have a couple more specific questions for you guys. So more specifically for Rob Foster, can you share a bit about your role as a construction manager, and how did your background in architecture help in this field, and how does it influence the way you work?
Yeah, so a bit about my role as a construction manager. I'll just probably start there. So I work for a larger general contractor, so we often get selected to work hand in hand with the designers at the beginning of design. So the ideal project for us is we're actually selected at the same time as the designer, and we're working with the design team to kind of work through constructability and cost, and throughout the design process we're there pricing things and planning construction. So just as an example, right now we're working on the administration building, a new administration building at the airport in San Diego. And so we're working directly with HOK, and, you know, I actually taking a break from an all-day design meeting to be in this right now, our lunch break. So it's actually a very good mix for me. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm more detail oriented. I was never really good at the theoretical design concepts and being the guy with the big idea, more the problem solver and the detail oriented person. So I think the background in architecture really helped me there, because I have a little bit more respect and a little bit better understanding of the design process. So when you're working hand in hand with someone from with architects and the other disciplines, from the construction standpoint, you can kind of relate a little bit better to what they're doing and what they have to go through. It was actually really interesting, just a little story. My second year in architecture school, we had got into, I think we were learning the concepts of harmony, unity, balance, contrast, and order. I probably get those mixed up because I don't remember them really well, but I was sitting there thinking, like, what am I doing in this architecture lab? I actually had a really influential professor that came up, and he could tell what was going on with me. And he's like, I know this stuff isn't for you. But like, stick through this. This is going to be valuable to you. He's like, and kind of talked me out of probably bailing at that point, and was probably really influential in getting me to finish my architecture degree, which was really interesting. That same professor, you know, a couple of months later went around the classroom and told everyone what they'd be doing in 10 years. And he said I would be working for a contractor on design build projects, which is basically what I'm sitting doing today at 13 years out. So he was right on the money. I actually had a great experience with starting to work for a contractor, telling them that I wanted, you know, my license was something I really wanted to get and finish in my career. And it was actually very interesting in interviews. You'd interview with one contractor and they'd say, well, they look at you funny and basically, why are you interviewing with me? You have an architecture degree. You want to go get your license. Why are we even talking? With Sunt, it was a completely different experience. They said, you want to come work for us. You want to get your license. You know, we value that. That's something, because of the way we work and the way we work with design teams, that's something we want you to do. So yeah, we'd love to do that. So it kind of actually was very influential in me landing at where I'm working at today. So hopefully that answered the question. I don't have much more unless there's any more specific questions.
That was fantastic. And it's so great to hear also your professor didn't just call it, but it actually encouraged you to continue, because we would have missed out on, right?
Right.
Jamie, do you have any follow-up?
Yeah,
Well,
just for you, Rob, I think I connect with you as well because I was not one of those young kids that always knew they wanted to be an architect. My dad was an architect, and I, being young, got that forced onto me, but thought I want to do something else. And I actually did a completely different undergrad. So my question, follow up to you, is did you always know that you were going to be in construction related, but you knew that architecture was going to help and give more value? So per your
So
professor's advice, stuck through it?
yeah, I didn't always know I'd be doing construction. I think when I started school, it was like right around that time in my second year that I started a construction management minor, that I kind of knew that was where I was headed. I had somewhat of a construction background growing up, so a little bit of experience there. But to be perfectly honest, I think I was being lazy when like my freshman year of high school, when we picked up the book and someone said, write a paper about what you want to be later in life, and architecture is like right at the front of the book. And so I wrote about it, and it was like, oh, you need to be good at math and you need to be good at art. And I wasn't good at art, and I thought I was good at math. It turns out neither one's true, but
Oh my gosh.
that's where I ended up.
I'm sure that's not true, but okay. Thank you. I love that. I think a lot of people connect with that. And there's
Yeah.
this kind of expectation that you turn 18 and start applying for colleges and you're supposed to know exactly what you're supposed to do. And there's,
Mm.
I think, only a very small amount of people I know in my life that knew that. So thanks for sharing. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So our next question is for Isabel. So lab planning is really specific, life sciences in particular. I would just love to hear your experience and your background, and how did you get exposed to lab planning in or after architecture school? And maybe share with us how is it integrated into each of the phases of a project?
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so I didn't discover lab planning as a career choice until later in my career, really maybe 5, 6 years after I had graduated. I went to architecture school, I did a master's, I did the traditional path. I got my license, I got my lead AP, and then I was like, well, what's next? And I had a little bit of a midlife career crisis where I was like, where am I? Where am I growing? I don't want to be a project manager. I don't want to be, that kind of person. I want to stay involved in the technical details. And then I discovered lab planning as a career choice. I had an excellent mentor, just like Rob mentioned. Sometimes there's one person that changes your life for the better. I admired them very much when I had the opportunity to work on this large facility that was research, and realize the complexity of all the information that you have to work on, work with the scientists to understand their process and all the different types of equipment that you have to keep track of, and how interactive it is with other disciplines, especially MEP. And it's really the complexity of it, and the fact that there's a lot of learning every day, reading about new standards and knowing that I can have a little drop in the bucket for scientists that are trying to find the next cure for a disease, or discovering the next thing that is going to happen to save the ocean, or whatever research they're working on. Or maybe it's an aerospace engineer that's looking for the next vehicle that's going to go to the moon. I mean, helping the scientists in their mission and inspiring them is what keeps me going in the morning. So it's really exciting career path. San Diego is actually a major cluster for life sciences. So if you are interested in helping scientists create cures for disease, San Diego is a perfect place to be. There's a lot of innovators and smart people that are creating companies every day to solve the problems of medicine and human environmental problems as well. So very exciting career choice. So I think you might, some people may think that if you're a lab designer, you're only working within the four walls where the lab is. But the reality is that lab planning involves a lot of aspects of how do you get things from point A to B? So I might be coordinating with the landscape team on where is the, the large truck that is bringing my deliveries, where are they gonna come, and how big does the elevator need to be, and working with the structural engineer on setting the vibration criteria for the floor, and working with the MEP engineer about air changes and what needs to be ventilated, and so on. There's so many aspects of it, and I love that in my daily work I get to work with engineers, scientists, and landscape architects and interior designers, and it all comes together beautifully in a single space. So
Thanks, Isabel. I just have one quick follow-on question to give the students here a glimpse of, like, a problem that you would solve. I know that you and I are working on a new project and talking about vibration criteria. Can you just give everyone an idea here? What does vibration criteria, A, what is it? I'm sure they know, but can you explain what it means in the lab planning world? B, what would that mean to a project that's a lab where they're
okay,
creating new therapies? Why is that so important? How does
cool.
that
Well,
integrate with structural and
so
design?
I'm not a structural engineer, nor do I play one on TV. So with keep that with a grain of salt.
Right.
But it's important because of the instrument. So think about when you're sitting in your chair at your desk and somebody walks behind you and they're kind of running a little bit. You feel the vibration in your chair. You kind of feel a whoosh of air as they pass by. Now imagine that you have a very sensitive instrument that is measuring, micrometers or some very small measure. Scientists work with cells and things that are really, really small. If you're trying to measure the weight of something, the sensitivity of that equipment, sometimes if you just get the air is flowing the wrong way, or you have that vibration on a train that's passing by the building outside, or a truck, and the structure is not designed to be rigid enough to support those variations, it can make your measurements wrong, which can ruin your research. So so those are things that are things that the engineers can say, oh, what type of instruments do you have? I have this very sensitive microscope that needs to be isolated. And sometimes it requires an isolated slab or certain springs.
Right.
Or, if you have analytical equipment that is measuring very small things and they're sensitive to air, then that's also important. So
Thanks, Isabel. Yeah.
mhm.
I was just trying to make it as an example, to let, to share with students what kind of things you deal with every day, and just to let everyone else know. I mean, that requirement there can be in project cost, a big one, because it affects architecture, it affects structural engineering, it affects interior design, lots of different parts of the puzzle, just to make sure that when you walk by, you didn't shake the microscope that was at Isabel's desk. So it's a big deal. So thanks, Isabel. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing. Oh, Lee, did you have a question?
I do. Well, just a point, because one thing that strikes me as really interesting from hearing from you, Isabel, is that, you're an architect, you're not a scientist, you don't run a lab. So I'm guessing in order to be able to come up with the right design interventions, you have to talk to people in other professions, other disciplines. You probably have to be a good listener.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the first thing that my mentor taught me when I was like, well, I don't know if this is for me. This sounds too complicated. It's like, what you have to do is show up and listen, because the experts on their process are the scientists. And so I really enjoy that part of my job, that is working hand in hand with the end users that are actually going to be in the space, and understanding. I may not understand the science behind why we need this particular equipment, but I know the aspects that affect building design. Like if they're using certain chemicals, I need to worry about where we're going to store them safely, and if we need fire rating, and if we need ventilation. And so I'm able to translate the needs of scientists into a checklist of requirements that then the engineers or the building designers can use to provide the proper infrastructure. So my role is being that bridge between the two.
I love that. Thanks, Isabel. And back to Rob's point. So if you're not, the next Nobel Prize winner, you could still work with people that do win the Nobel Prize and help them do their work. So appreciate you sharing that. Back to you, Dina.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that's really interesting. So I focus mostly on interior architecture, and one of the things that you're saying, Isabella, and you mentioned also just the cost effect of all of these things. There are things that can be replaced. You can always go to a less expensive finish or remove something from the wall, but those elements that you have to be implementing in the beginning of the project and all that coordination and all of those structural elements and the pieces and MEPs, those are what make and break a project. Those can't go away. So if you actually want that project to exist, those are you basically have the basis, right, of the project in your hands. The other ones might seem flashier, but those are replaceable at the end of the day, and you can alter them. But those bigger items in regards to cost and the feasibility for these projects are so important in the beginning phases. So it's awesome that you also get to work with all of these different experts in different fields that maybe as an architect I would have never imagined, oh, I'm going to be working with scientists on a day-to-day basis. So interesting, different opportunities and getting to dip into other areas that people might be interested in. I know a lot of people in architecture that actually have a lot of interest in medicine, but they went with the architecture route. So it's actually a nice way also to merge your interests, but still focusing on what you excel in.
Yeah, one of the most fun projects I ever worked on was actually a medical school, and talk about learning a lot of stuff about what goes on. I never knew what went on in medical school. So it's a really great opportunity to work on things like that.
Very cool.
Great point, yes. Keep the ball rolling. We're gonna shift a little bit of gear and talk to Matt, who has multiple hats that you wear. Matt, more specifically, you were introducing yourself saying that you are director of mixed use. You work in commercial, residential, and historic architecture. You're on the city historic board. How does all of this broad experience shape you into the architect you are today?
Well, simply put, it sort of helps me do a better job at everything I do to sort of know a lot about, a little bit, a lot of things. But I think the hat that I'm talking about and wearing today is focused on my interest in historic architecture. And I kind of have two realms I work in with that. One of them is the Historic Resource Board of the City of San Diego, which is a quasi-judicial board for the city that actually designates properties historic. So in the last 5 years, it's a volunteer effort. Last 5 years I've been on that board. We've designated over 300 different properties and structures in San Diego, and that's a voluntary effort. It's very interesting, though. It's very methodical. It's a lot of research. You're reading these 80-page reports that are given to us before we go to them, and it's sort of a different way of looking at architecture. Looking through the history and the layers of time and things like that. And then in my regular job, I have a fair amount of adaptive reuse projects, and a bunch of them are in historic, like designated historic structures, where you have to be very careful and very thoughtful about how you kind of work through those projects. And so, but I think the mindset for both those things, because personally my aesthetic is like super clean, super modern, design aesthetic. Most of the projects I work on are just, except for the historic ones, are very clean and straightforward. But I really love working on the historic structures because you can see the history and the layers of things, and you can kind of see how buildings have evolved over time and different building methods and materials. And it's just very, very interesting to me. But I think it also, to get back to has it sort of shaped my experience, is that kind of stuff really kind of layers in a different pile of stuff into my sort of architectural thinking about how things get put together, and how we look at buildings and how they last long and how they evolve. So that definitely is sort of crosses across all the practice areas that I work in. And it's just a very interesting field, and you know, adaptive reuse is, I mean, it's the most sustainable thing you can do, right? I mean, keeping buildings living into the future rather than tearing them down, that kind of thing. So I always think it's a good direction if people are interested in focusing on that type of stuff.
So with that was you mentioned having a more modern style, and I'm kind of interested as to, there's always a fine line with historic architecture as to how far am I going to be going with respecting the historic elements and just either balancing the language or making it very obvious that this is new and this is the historical part. What is kind of your strategy or your thoughts on it without replicating something historic and creating confusion, right? Because there's a fine line.
Yeah,
with that.
That's funny you say that. The language is pretty close to what you just said. In the Mills Act, it's, you do not want to create a false sense of history by whatever you do. So when you can do an addition to a historic structure, especially a designated one, but you can't just like glom on an exact replica of the original thing, because then some guys like us will come around 100 years from now and won't know what's going on. So what was original, what wasn't. So you should be respectful and thoughtful about the structure that you're working adjacent to, or to, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to like match, and in fact, it shouldn't. In fact, if you talk to the historic resource staff at the city of San Diego, they'll totally be like, don't do that. But yeah, and I think you can even put very modern, you know, additions to sort of historic structures. You've seen a lot of like museums that have done that, and you know, in sort of more urban areas like New York and, you know, older areas, Boston and Washington, D.C., they've got these really beautiful modern additions to older buildings. So I think you can do a lot of different things. It's just about being thoughtful and really trying to kind of understand the resource, the historic resource you're looking at and working with.
Great. Jamie, do you have a question for
I
Matt
do
as well?
have one more follow-on question, Matt, and just, you know, again, to connect with the students and give them an example of the kind of problems that you deal with every day. I really love the project that you've worked on in a previous work life with another firm that attached to a historic old house in Bankers Hill.
Oh.
And you were able to add this really beautiful addition that was a modern addition. Can you share a little bit about how did you, I guess, back to that same thing you were talking about, Dina, where did you draw the line of this is all the piece that we can't touch, we protect, and here's where we add, and how did that work with the Mills Act, and what did you have to do with the city, or were you on the board at that time? Did you approve your own project?
No, yeah, although I'm on the design assistance committee that kind of talks to architects and tries to help folks out, but that's more of a friendly conversation. But no, the board is just like yes or no, historic or not. Yeah, so the project that Jamie is mentioning is a 6,000 square foot addition, 3,000 square foot floor plate. So kind of a smaller little building. It's tucked in behind a historically designated structure on First Avenue, and
Hawthorne.
yeah, First and Hawthorne, and it's really cool. It's a law office. It's right behind the existing law office. And one of the things we did, and we spent a lot of time working with historic resource staff, because when it came through as a building permit, we didn't want them to be kind of throwing up some blockers. So we worked hand in hand with the staff. We actually even talked to some local historic folks and made sure we were we weren't, you know, doing anything too crazy. But we actually originally had the building set out right on the street, and it was sort of proud of the historic resource, and so we were kind of pulled that back so it wouldn't kind of dominate the building site. We used materials from the original historic resource, not off the historical resource, but we used them in a different kind of way. We took lap siding and put it on which is part of the original building, and used it as a soffit. And so you can kind of see hints of the original building in that modern building, but it's definitely, so it's friends, and it's maybe more like cousin. But it was really fun to kind of bring some of those notes and some of that language to that new building, and have it sort of fit in the site real well. So you guys drive by, you can kind of, hopefully it kind of sits there really nicely and doesn't take away from the main building. You know?
I put a link in the chat, so if you want to check it out, it really is this beautiful gem of a building behind. And I actually lived in the neighborhood, and it was nice. And what was special about that building, Matt? Why Why historic? Was that just, it used to be an old mansion, or was there
Yeah,
something that happened there, or an important person?
that one, it's one of the few remaining extant buildings of that particular style and of that particular era. So that wasn't, usually historic is either a famous person slept there, a famous architect built it, or it's a famous style. Those are one of the three. And if it's a famous style, it's got to be like intact too. It can't have been adapted or messed up over the years. And so that's the reason that one was designated.
Nice.
And yeah, so that was a really fun project.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and thanks for sharing. And again, another tangible way they can connect and see why was that building so important. So that makes sense. So thank you.
So those actually, sorry, I was just gonna say, from the construction side, I think it might also be pretty interesting that there is, for Rob, have you ever worked on anything historic, or just on the construction side? I think it might also be interesting, those kind of challenges that you might get, right?
I think Barbara,
touch this or not?
I think Barbara can answer this question as good as I can, but it was not a historic building, but an old building. We actually renovated the tower on Broadway and First downtown that used to be the old National Bank building and reskinned it. And yeah, to what Matt said earlier, is it's always really interesting because every time you tear something apart, you got to go back with the design team and find 6 more details, figure out what you planned on putting there, how it connects back into it. So
and to do it within budget.
Yeah, that part doesn't usually happen with renovation. But yeah, it's a very interesting process. It's actually really fun to try to figure out how to fit something new onto something old, and it requires a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite things. It's a very there's a very forensic piece to it, where you're kind of have to kind of figure out I've had to do like destructive testing on bricks and stress testing on different types of grout to make sure a wall could handle some of the interventions that we've done, and then sometimes you have to do even X-ray investigation to kind of figure out what's going on in a building. So
I'm going to share that project example too in the chat. That's another really great, beautiful project from the Office of Carrier Johnson, who's our next guest here. Allison, good afternoon. So I would love to talk to you about the specialty of project architecture, which I don't know if a lot of younger emerging professionals, what the distinction is between the big thick line and the project architecture piece of it, which is more technical. In your opinion, can you share some of the technical aspects of your field and how that differs from conceptual design, but how do you carry that through all phases as well?
Hello. Well, technical design reinforces the conceptual design. It's still design, but in the smaller strokes. So when we usually get a project starting like from entitlement, it's a lot of things to look at, such as, from the programming standpoint, the FAR, all the zoning. You have to look into the municipal code. Just checking on the aspect of it, the right type of building, and in the right context. From this technical standpoint, I think even from beginning when you do design, you have to have a handle of code like the CPC. Those are important because then you can identify your Ford or what they like to see. On the point, you also need to pay attention to Title 24 ADA, your means of egress, adjacencies. So you need to get the fire protection from one to the other. So you need to check out, all the code searching, looking at different aspects of the corner that you can't get out. So all these components are really important. A lot of times when you're in school, you know, the world's your oyster, so you can design all kinds of things, which is great in the creativity standpoint. But once you put it into the real world, when you practice architecture, there are restrictions there, just like the
Oh, I think we might have lost Allison for a minute. Someone's streaming a movie in the house.
Oh no.
the code that,
Mm.
you know, you have to think twice
Mhm.
what you're doing to make sure you are to forget all the
Oh, we lost her.
Oh
Oh
no.
no! So we're gonna wait for Allison to come back on, but she's gonna hate me for doing this. I'm gonna have a follow-on question to my favorite project architect, Barbara Leon. Hi, Barb. So one of my favorite project
Hi.
architects I've ever worked with. And it was one of the follow-on questions I was gonna ask Allison is, can you share a little bit about what is the difference between municipal code and California building code if the students here don't know? And why do you have to check both? Why is that important?
Yeah, that's just, it's a big part of the mystery when you're young and you don't understand how do you know what codes apply? What are the restrictions that apply to every single project? And it can be really intimidating. And part of the great thing about taking the AREs is that it takes away a lot of that intimidation and taking those tests so you understand it. But basically there's two sides of pretty much the way that regulations are applied to a project. One is the building code, and those are, you know, purely code elements. And then there's also the planning side, which is the right to be able to build something on a piece of land. And that's usually the planning department or the local authority having jurisdiction. Every authority will have a building department side and a planning department side, and the building department will enforce the building code. The planning department will enforce the municipal code. The municipal code are part of that, you know, county or that cities, just all of the local laws that go that kind of specify what, you know, are you allowed to build something in that zone? How many parking spots are required? The types of building that you can even put on there, and they will review the design and things like that. But the CB in the state of California, most cities are going to enforce the California building code unless they have their own amendments, like the city of Los Angeles. San Diego doesn't have any amendments, but basically any city can be a little bit more stringent than the state code if they want. And if they don't, then we would defer to the California building code. And the California building code is based on they use the international building code. But it could be very complicated, but yeah, taking like I said, the AREs and then finally getting a license just really helps break down a lot of that. But that's pretty much the kind of breakdown of those two types of regulations on most projects, at least in California.
Thanks, Barb. I appreciate it. And welcome back, Allison. Sorry, I was just joking. Someone must be streaming a movie in your house. So that happens to us all the time on Zoom.
I don't know. I've been having computer problems since last night, and it's pretty stressful to keep up with work. Sorry about that.
Oh, no
people.
worries. No worries. I had asked a follow-on question to another favorite project architect of mine, Barb, about the difference between CBC and municipal. So she was able to shed a little light on that. I do think Dina has a follow-on question for you, Allison. Dina?
Yes, actually. So I've had the pleasure of working with Allison in one of the, and she's a project architect at Carrie Johnson. So I refer to her as a walking encyclopedia. So I go to her for a lot of questions. So Allison, one of the things, and actually it was interesting because Rob, you kind of touched on this from your idea of what an architect you have to be really good at art and you have to be really good at math. And one of the things that I notice a lot for people, that's like the biggest thing that they get scared of, is the math part, actually. So Allison, with you being a project architect, and you just gave students a whole list of items that you have to check here, and you have to check this code, and you're talking to multiple disciplines. Can you shed a little bit of light of the architect's overall role in the project team?
Well, I think that an architect, well, I like to use an analogy of a chef or composer. So when you're more, like a conductor and a composer, you have some knowledge of all the parts, so it can keep the project on intact and on track. But we also have a vision for all those parts that's, to like a composer have an ear for all the instrument. So all the bits and pieces, you're just orchestrating it. I'm a foodie myself. I love to eating the product afterwards. So I think you just see all the bits and pieces, like the spices that you put together, the ingredients. So you put a main dish together. All these different bits and pieces go into your recipe. Without any one of those, it wouldn't taste good, or at the end, it probably won't, look good up, miss something, say that creating another design issue to resolve. So following, procedural steps is important. That's why we have construction document and get into, construction administration. All these phases have steps to take place, and things have to be orchestrated to be in line with each other, to be in a good balance, so that you don't misstep and missing something that is important at that juncture. And a lot of times, value engineering come in during, DD phase. And like you said before, just like finishes, you can swap out to be something else. Maybe it's just as elegant without compromising your design. So all these steps in the professional world, it happens all the time. It's just orchestrating, of course, the end of the project, everything is. And I think that's the joy of being in this profession, is that you see the end product. And a lot of times I would drive around town when my children were small. Well, mommy built this. Well, I don't physically build it, but I am part of. So something to be proud of. And hopefully those buildings will last for the satisfaction. I think that outweighs the long grueling hours you're in school or at work. At the end, it's worth it to be an architect. So.
Well, thank you so much, Allison. That is actually very true. There
Back
are
to
a
you.
lot. There are a lot of very, very long hours in our profession, but you're right. Getting to see a finished product and saying, "Hey, I was a part of that," and eventually, we're hoping that the things that we build are going to be projects that another historic architect will be looking at years down the road, right? And preserving what we created.
Those buildings are like our babies. You bring them up from the beginning and you watch them grow and
Right.
develop.
That's what Matt comes in.
Yeah. I would also add, it's really cool. Not only just you're, being like the orchestrator of all of this, like Allison said, I also like just in orchestrating all these ideas together and putting them on paper and finding the best way to graphically communicate this. Like these are all ideas, they're all just in our head, but what is the best way to put them on a piece of paper or on a PDF nowadays, and having other people also understand your ideas and the visions of everything, and then having that become the building, that's what's really satisfying and just brings a lot of it's just great to see those become those buildings, the drawings that you were working on for so long, and then having it become a reality with people like, Rob come in and help make that happen.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. Jamie, do you have, we're about to start, we have a little bit of a Q&A time, but if there's a follow-up question and if everyone else would like to start adding some questions on the chat, we can have those ready to go.
So for all our students in the virtual, in our virtual audience, if you can go ahead and just share any questions you have in the virtual chat. I do have one more follow-on question, so I can ask that while the questions start loading up. But this is, back to Allison's point about having multiple layers of criteria that we have to look at. I'd actually like to ask this of Isabel. So, back to the example of the California building code from Barb versus a municipal building code, and then Matt layered on the addition of the historic requirements that you have to look at. Isabel, can you kind of frame an example for us of how that would work again in a lab building? Are you also looking at things like ISO standards for either a certain piece of equipment, or if you're building a different type of lab? How would that work? What's another layer you would specifically be looking at as part of the puzzle?
Yeah, I can think of at least a couple of examples that are very specific to lab. One that is very common is the CDC has this biosafety level.
That's right.
Of labs. There's biosafety level 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is like if you saw a movie like Outbreak or where the Ebola,
yeah.
and there were people wearing like spacesuits with air. That's at level 4, biosafety level 4. Most labs in commercial settings, research labs, are biosafety level 2. That means that whatever microbes or pathogens they're working with have to be handled carefully in an enclosure, like a biosafety cabinet, so that they don't make the people that are working with them sick. So you have to wear certain PPE and work on a certain level of air and ventilation so that you don't get sick handling those materials. But at a biocell 2, if you get sick, there's a cure. At a biocell 3, there may not be a cure, or it's a danger, and you can accidentally create a pandemic. So those are serious requirements, and so the CDC has guidelines for how do we keep those hazardous biologics controlled. You mentioned ISO. ISO is related to the contamination levels in the air, and so this is common in clean rooms. For example, if you're creating a medical device or a medicine that is going to be injected inside a person, you don't want any contaminants to be inside that. Of course, the FDA regulates these requirements, and there's a whole book on good manufacturing practices. If you have a compounding pharmacy that has a medicine that is powder and the powder flies in the air, you don't want any, even if you're doing cosmetics, you don't want any contamination to affect those products that are going to be used for humans or even for animals. Pet food has strict controls as well. So those controls require certain level of finishes. For example, there cannot be any ledges in the wall, so everything's scoved, everything's epoxy coated. There has to be controls on how the air goes in and out of the room, and what kind of air filtration needs to happen when the air comes in, and also when the air is exhausted.
Oh, geez.
What else can I think of? I mean, there is certainly more environmental requirements. Instruments can be sensitive to humidity or certain temperature ranges. So if the humidity goes under a certain value,
Stops
it can affect the
working.
results of your medication.
Wow.
Last one that I can think of, vivariums. Vivariums are animal research facilities, and they fall into two categories: containment and barrier. So a containment facility is where the enclosure of that research facility doesn't allow anything to get out. I worked on a influenza research facility where they wanted to make sure that nothing that was in the lab was getting out into the community and making
Jeez.
other animals sick. So there's very control requirements on different sets of doors that you have to go through and the security behind that. A
Wow.
barrier facility, for example, if you had mice that had been genetically engineered to have certain characteristics, you're researching cancer, you're researching Alzheimer or something like that. The animals have a stripped immune system like a person that is dealing with chemotherapy would have. So a person that is working inside that enclosure can make an animal sick because the
Oh my
animal doesn't
gosh.
have the immune system that a normal animal would have. So
Oh my gosh.
in that case, what you're trying to do is the enclosure keeps the animals clean, and you as the person need to shower, wash up, and put this vinyl suit to go in so that the animals don't get sick from any pathogens you might bring in. So
I think just your example of outbreak, and I think well, not everyone, the younger students here might not have, but if you've seen that movie and all the different things they have to put on and take off and doors before they even get to the room, that's pretty scary. I don't think I could ever work with something like Ebola. That would scare me too much. So thank you. Thanks for shedding some light on that.
But someone
Okay.
has to, right?
Someone has to do
Yeah.
it. Otherwise we
I
would
mean,
not
there's
have tears.
probably maybe
So,
50 labs of that kind in the entire world.
oh my God.
They're definitely
Jeez.
not common, but
Thank you. Okay, so we did have some questions for our audience. This one's from Sierra. What project delivery systems do you think will lead the industry in the future? Design, build, CM at risk, etc. Maybe Rob, you can start with this one. Any thoughts on that? What's your opinion? Oh, you may be on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Can you
No, you're
repeat the
okay.
question again? I'm
Yeah,
looking for it in the chat.
what project delivery system do you
Oh,
think will lead the industry? Design, build, CM at risk?
I mean, there's different reasons for different project types, and it's really owner driven. You've seen, I mean, in the last, probably even before my career started, you've seen a transition to more design, build, and CM at risk, just because it creates a better culture of cooperation between designers and architects when we're hired at the same time and we work together, instead of an architect or design team developing a set of plans in a vacuum, and then we come in with a low bid and then it's just a battle there on out. So there's reasons certain types of projects are done that way and certain owners select projects that way, but I would say I would encourage you to direct your career in the direction of a more collaborative environment than for design, build, and CM at risk. So I guess I'm saying I'm hopeful that we're moving that way.
Well, yeah,
I think we
thanks
are.
for the feedback. What do you think, Matt, with your mixed use hat? Do you have any leanings, design, build? What do you think about Rob's comment?
Well, I love design build, but I think what I like the most about it is the early collaboration with contractors to get the design right and in line with budgets earlier and faster. So it doesn't matter the contractual arrangement, whether it's the three-legged stool, but the owner carrying all three contracts, or we're underneath the contractor as a direct contract. So, but I just like that arrangement where the design bid build kind of era is pretty much over. And it is more about, like I said, no matter what the contractual arrangement is, it is about bringing all these people on earlier to get to the answer faster and better and cleaner and without the least amount of kind of issues. So that's the best way to deal with. Yeah, and it's the best way to keep budgets in alignment and all this other kind of stuff. So that's kind of where my head's at. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, well, we have a couple of different questions. So I'm glad to hear that. Sorry if some people have to jump off, but we're going to see a little bit more every time. One of the questions actually is, what do you guys recommend doing to find a career that will make you enjoy going to work every day? Now, since anyone's welcome to please comment on this, but Allison, you just said that you've been in the same company for your entire, like almost your entire career span. So maybe I'll start with you. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think going to work in the office every day right now is still, you learn something new every day and you never finish learning. I think that's what excites me, that sustained me for that many years staying in this career. Also, the people. I think the people that I'm very fortunate to work with a lot of talent in our field, and have interaction with them. It doesn't matter how young you are, you just got out of school, or you are still in school as an intern, or how old you are like me. It doesn't matter. We always learn from each other, no matter what. There's always something that you can teach. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? So your approach could be different than other people, but if the the results come out the same, that doesn't matter. Or teamwork is important, and I think I love people, and I that's why I love to be mentoring young people, and in return I get mentored by my mentees too. So you just have to find your excitement, to get up going, get up every day and looking forward to learning something new. And in this profession, the world's your oyster. There's so many different construction types. So, and that's why I think I stay at one place, because projects comes and go with so many different facets. It's when you come around the corner
Oh,
that is something new, something more keeps me going.
yeah.
Love that.
Well, Allison, one of the main things you said, ultimately, I think the biggest answer is the people. Make sure you're working with great people, and you're gonna love going to work every single day. So I'm just gonna read real quick one of the questions that also came in from the chat, and Rob
Actually,
has
Dina, I think we're out of
Okay.
time. Sorry
Okay.
about that. Sorry to all the students. We're gonna make sure to follow up on your questions via a follow-up email. We'll actually gather the information from our esteemed panelists here and reply to everyone with all the great information. But I just wanted to personally say thank you to each of our panelists for sharing their over decades-long career of information here with y'all today. We hope it was helpful to see little glimpses of how you can specialize in our field. You don't just need to be the big designer with a big thick pen. There's lots of different ways you can integrate, and it depends on what you're interested in. And just again, thank you so much to our esteemed panelists here for sharing their feedback, and to AIA for letting us host this. So thank you all again, and look for this on our YouTube channel. We'll be sharing it to everyone if you weren't able to come, or share it with your friends. Have a good day, everyone.